Well, hello and welcome everybody to this the ultimate frontier of this very interesting series of online seminars on peace journalism. Thanks very much for joining us. We have three very distinguished speakers, and I'm going to hand over to them in a minute. Really, we're talking today about how to grow and spread peace journalism into the future. One of the first research questions that was thrown up really by Johan Galtung's idea of peace journalism was whether it actually existed or whether it was just pie in the sky. And so I think I'm right in saying that the largest single category of published research still takes the form of operationalizing the peace journalism model to derive evaluative criteria for content analysis. Those analyses invariably show there is some peace journalism. So, of course, it raises the tantalizing question to us in the Peace Journalism Club of how could there be more? So we can take that as our watchword for this session. I'm going to hand over in a moment to Professor Shahira Fahmy, who is from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at the American University in Cairo. Her research focuses on visual communication and peace journalism, really pioneering, groundbreaking stuff. Most recently, analyzing how emerging technologies are transforming the relationship between media and terrorism in society. And she has over 100 refereed journal articles and book chapters to her credit, in addition to 4 books. And she's been showered with awards for her groundbreaking work in the field. Ahmed Al-Rawi is an associate professor of news, social media, and public communication at the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University. He's also the founder of the Disinformation Project, and his research interests are related to news, global communication, misinformation, and social media, with emphasis on Canada and the Middle East. So plenty to go out there, of course, including current events. And last but by no means least, we'll hear from Dr. Matteo Cinelli, who is an assistant professor in computer science at the University of Rome, La Sapienza. He's a member of the Center of Data Science and Complexity for Society, and his research interests include network and data science, mostly in the context of information diffusion and social media. So a range of concerns reflecting, I think you'd agree, a very contemporary and highly relevant swathe of issues confronting us in the world at the moment. Looking forward to the discussion and first of all to hear from our speakers. And first of all, Shahira, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Slides. So just hopefully I can do everything in 10 minutes. Slideshow. Okay. First, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me here. And today I'm going to be talking about peace journalism and photos or visuals. So I first got introduced to peace journalism more than a decade ago. And but then I learned that peace journalism basically urges journalists to report the news in a way that highlights peace initiatives and tones down differences, as opposed to highlighting differences and urging violence as a means to a resolution. So we all know that peace journalism, when you look at it quantitatively, it basically talks about how news is framed. And since my focus is really visual communication, I thought, well, let me look at the studies that have been done looking at text. And most of us who do peace journalism quantitative studies are familiar with the indicators that were published by Lee and Maslog. So I looked at these indicators, and then I looked at visual framing. And those of you who are not familiar with visual framing, it's the process in which one selects a specific frame or elements in an image to shape viewers' perspective. And for the presentation today, I thought I would look at the current ongoing war in Gaza. So just consider the difference between showing a graphic image that shows suffering and death, as opposed to an image, let's say, for example, an image that talks about negotiations and reconciliation, for example. How is this going to affect the way you perceive the ongoing conflict? So I came up with specifically 5 indicators to be able to look at peace versus war frames in terms of visuals. The first indicator was looking at the role. What is the role of the individual in the specific image? Is the person shown as the victim, the aggressor, the negotiator, or the demonstrator? And for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to include visual examples for each of them. So here we can see the victim in this picture is a Palestinian man mourning over the body of a child. So this is a war frame. And here is an example of a war here. I'm not going to go into any politics, but we can see here a picture of Netanyahu and Sinwar. And let me just move on to negotiator frame. Here we have the picture of UN Secretary Antonio Guterres addressing reporters in New York. So this is clearly an image that shows us, there is some hope. Last but not least, we have the picture here of Jewish Voice for Peace demonstrating, asking for a ceasefire in Gaza. The next indicator that I developed is looking at physical harm. And here were 3 categories. Starting with not severe. And here were, when you have an image that doesn't show any physical damage. Second, you have pictures that shows severe physical harm. And here would be pictures of wounded or people bleeding. And then, of course, severe, which would be pictures of dead people or showing bodies. Let me show you very quickly some examples. Here's a picture that shows a Palestinian couple chatting. Again, this is a picture that comes in the last few weeks. Again, this picture, at least, and also the frame next to it has some, doesn't show any violence or any physical harm, as opposed to this photo, for example, showing a series of dead bodies, again in Gaza. So the next category that kind of fit right after the physical harm is the age. So when we all know, when we see a picture, for example, of an adult that's that's hurting, as opposed to a picture of a child that's hurting, of what's going on, a different feeling. So in this category, you looked at children and adolescents versus adults. So to demonstrate, let me show you this picture here. Again, children in Gaza, undergoing severe physical pain and emotional pain and suffering. You can see how this picture kind of affects us in a way that would probably be different than showing a picture of adults or in this situation particularly. The next indicator was looking at emotions. Of course, in this case, then pictures that are from far away, this would be more difficult to look at, or to analyze and categorize. But when we have pictures that are close-ups or pictures that we can are close enough to be able to identify emotions, then we can code these pictures in terms of positive and negative. And when you think of negative, of course, we have a whole range of emotions like anger, frustration, desperation, and mourning, and all kinds of painful emotions, as opposed to positive ones that include hope and redemption and optimism. And here, of course, is a very very intense picture of this guy, of this Palestinian man undergoing a lot of emotional despair. And then, as opposed to this picture, for example, we can see this Palestinian bride being escorted by her father. We can see her image happy and hopeful for a better future. Last but not least, we have the de-escalation and escalation variable. And here there were basically 3 categories. The first one emphasized rehabilitation and recovery or reconstruction. Then we have the war ones would be like the backlash and deterioration, ones that show the ongoing war and conflict. And then last, we have the neutral, which is ones that kind of emphasize status quo. And these include like burning of flags or, whatever content that doesn't necessarily contribute or affect the outcome of the conflict in any way. So, for example, here is a picture of the backlash and deterioration. Here we see kids in a schoolyard afraid of the bombs that are might fall at this particular moment, as opposed to this image, for example, which was published early on in the conflict, where we see here children in Gaza singing. So in this case, this would be an image that shows achievement and progress. At least back, probably they were a bit more hopeful. And then here is an example of the status quo. Again, like I mentioned, pictures of burning of flags. These pictures wouldn't affect the conflict in any way. Overall, the studies that I've done that focused on peace journalism and visual communication, they've over and over again kind of showed the predominant of war-oriented approach as opposed to peaceful one. And these findings, again, previous studies that focused on text, but this doesn't mean that there were no peaceful narration or reporting. There were, but not enough. So what are the next steps and what are the opportunities? We all know that social media is reshaping the way we consume the news, and most of us, social media has become now kind of a dominant source of news. So what I'm focusing on right now, and I have a couple of my graduate students, I think they're here today, focusing on the TikTok platform and trying to look at peace versus war, trying to analyze the TikTok videos in terms of the textual and visual indicators that have used in previous studies, and also including the TikTok affordances, looking at the association categories and editability categories, and also, last but not least, including engagement variables such as likes and shares and comments. These are going to be very important, especially if we're going to be looking at, okay, if we identify, let's say, a peace TikTok video, then what are the association, what are the affordances that were used, what are the number of likes and shares, what is the content that were used, how can we increase the virality of these videos. I think this is all very important if we're trying to again promote peace journalism. Specifically when we talk about social media and the ongoing and the current social media digital environment where we're in. And I hope I was good with time. Jay?
So I was just about to alert you to the imminent end of your allotted time, Shahira. But if you want to wrap it up there, that's great. But thank you very much. Very interesting presentation indeed. Now, of course, we'll throw open the floor to questions and contributions after the speakers. But let me then therefore move on, please, to invite Ahmed to come in and give your take. Can't see you there. Are you still with us?
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
You might need to unmute yourself, Ahmed. I can see you, yeah.
So you cannot hear me?
I think he is unmuted, but the volume is very low.
Yeah, the volume's low.
Yeah, I can't actually hear you at the moment.
So can you hear me now? No?
It's very low, the volume.
Yeah, it's still very
Still
low.
can't really hear, I'm afraid.
Matt can start.
That's
Okay,
better.
actually, it's better
Yeah,
now.
we've got you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. This all sometimes happens. So yeah, thank you so much. I'll try to be as concise as possible. I appreciate the invitation to talk about viral news and how it could be connected to peace journalism. So just to give you context, I conducted a few studies about virality because I was very curious to see what drives it. And specifically, it seems that emotions have a very important role to be played here. So the first study I did was to operationalize news values. And I looked at New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, especially on social media and specifically on Twitter and YouTube. I just wanted to see what is driving audiences around in news from these outlets. I also conducted a study called Networked Emotional News, doing the same thing, but with Facebook emojis, or what they call reactions. I think these emojis are very significant because they also embed in them a lot of emotions. So again, this whole thing is an exploration about how audiences engage with news. To my surprise, I found that in the viral news piece that audiences actually tend to like positive news. And that's unlike the, let's say, traditional idea about the importance of bad news. It seems that a lot of people are seeking good news, especially when it comes to peace and so on. So that was, for me, surprising. To give you a few details about the study, I looked at 17 elements that could drive news and make it viral, relying on news values theory or newsworthiness. So, for example, I looked at variance, whether news is positive or negative. And I also looked at the issue of arousal. And for arousal, it's mostly about anger and anxiety. O is more positive, anger and anxiety are more negative. So for arousal, it's about activation of certain feelings. And usually sadness is not regarded as one part of arousal because there is deactivation. Activation usually happens with inspiring stories, or for example, stories involving anger as well as anxiety. Now, because it's interesting that Shahira has focused on the war in Gaza. I also did the same thing because it's probably the most significant conflict happening today, and I wanted to examine, for instance, virality when it comes to this conflict. I'm not sure whether you know, but in Canada, actually, we cannot view news on social media anymore. There was a bill, it's a long story. So it was very frustrating because I wanted to share with you some images from Facebook, but I couldn't, I was blocked. So I resorted to Telegram. It's another well-known mobile app. And I wanted to see what is happening, like what is driving audiences on Telegram today, applying these concepts. Because I wanted to see whether audiences are really only interested in negative news about it, or maybe they are seeking some positive news, something about peace. So I started my exploration with a very well-known Telegram channel, which is really, really huge, called Gaza Now. I really encourage everyone to have a look at it on Telegram because it has over 1.8 million subscribers. That's much bigger than the New York Times and so many other mainstream news outlets. But it also shows you the kind of information need a lot of audiences have towards the events happening in Gaza. And so that's mostly like we talk about citizen journalists, people on the ground taking photos as well as videos of what is going on. I downloaded all the data. That's what I do. I do a lot of data analysis and big data collection. And I wanted to see, for example, the top 20 or top 10 news outlets based on views on Telegram, because that's what is driving virality. And to my surprise, I was also, surprised to see that, for example, some awe-inspiring stories, like, for instance, rescue of injured people or people who are, for instance, stuck underneath rubble or underneath a demolished house, seem to be garnering a lot of attention or views from people. So amongst the top 20, I saw, for example, how frontline workers in Gaza successfully managed to rescue a few people. Other top stories included peaceful protests happening in Morocco or New York, calling for ceasefire. So notice here how virality is being driven. People are actually seeking positive news. And what else? On Palestine TV, that's another well-known Telegram channel that is viewed a lot by people in the Middle East region. So Palestine on Telegram has a few viral stories about how, for example, just prayers are being held in Jerusalem, in Quds in Arabic. That's just like very neutral, very peaceful. Just prayers during the Ramadan month. I also noticed that some human interest stories have been gaining a lot of attention. For example, stories about animals. Surprisingly, there were some stories about Palestinians feeding cats. That was something interesting for them. Or how, for instance, donkeys are being used. It's very casual, but it also gives you some kind of probably escape from the gloomy, depressing reality of the conflict. So that's, again, something about how people are seeking neutral, peaceful, good stories amidst this very, very depressing conflict. I think I covered a lot, but one more thing I just wanted to add. When it comes to emotions, it's very complicated. That's probably a conceptual issue. So to give you one example, I looked at the story, again, one of the viral stories on Gaza now. It was about a child, 5 years old child. And this is connected to what Shahira just mentioned about children. Children also is an important element in the news virality. So any story about children maybe suffering or in need could garner a lot of attention. But I noticed that some stories were talking about killed children that garnered a lot of attention from people. And I kept on wondering, like, what made it viral? I think when it comes to emotions, it's complicated because the way we react to news could be different. So going back to the theory of viral news, we talked about arousal being either anxiety or anger, and much less sadness. But here, for this specific story, a child who's only 5 years old, having dreams of becoming an engineer and becoming successful, got a lot of attention from audiences because of mixed feelings. Some of them were sad, but others were actually angry by what happened or anxious that this could happen to to themselves. And I also noticed this when I looked at other unrelated stories from previous research. For example, a gorilla that died in a zoo. People reacted on this story specifically in different ways, mostly sadness, but also anger at the zoo management and some kind of sometimes expressions or mixed expressions. So we don't really have an agreement about how to react towards stories, especially when it comes to emojis and so on. So that's probably a conceptual issue I wanted to highlight. And thank you so much. I see that I have spent about 9 minutes. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for those very interesting reflections and for your discipline in keeping to time. So we'll move on now to hear from Matteo. Hopefully you're still with us there, Matteo.
Yeah. I'm here.
Great. Good. Well, the floor is yours. 10 minutes.
Thanks. So I have some slides, so I share my screen. I hope you see my slides.
Yeah, we got them.
Okay, let me go full screen. So I titled this small talk, hopefully, postcard from social media, as I'm just gonna provide you some images from a long journey into research into social media. So I work at the Center of Data Science and Complexity for Society, where we have 3 main research teams, which are the study of misinformation spreading, the study of online toxicity, the study of infodemics, so information overload and overabundance of information, and the study of online segregation and echo chambers. And we will cover some of these themes in like this 10 minutes. So The idea is that in the Paleolithic times of data science, so 2010, we have this very interesting article in The Economist called The Data at the Large. So still 14 years ago, people were talking about the overabundance actually of data and potentially about the information overload. But actually, things got much worse over the year, or better, depending from the point of view. As you can see in this graph, the red arrow points to the number of internet users in 2010, and we can see that we're kind of half of what we have now. This data the large continued. So until in 2019, we had a big storm. So we had an infodemic during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have extreme overabundance of information regarding a very salient and possibly problematic topic, which was actually an ongoing epidemic. And we actually contributed to the definition of an infodemic with some WHO members as overabundance of information. The thing is that things didn't stop. Essentially, the production of data didn't stop for sure in 2019, but it's still continuing. So, for instance, you can see that the number of social media identities for a number of reasons that are like we have multiple social media profiles, and in general, people are having more access to social media and an internet connection is growing. So we are also kind of producers of information. So the amount of data and the amount of information is growing over time. This happened together with a shift of paradigm, as we were also mentioning before, in the production of information that went from a mediated environment of the old or legacy media, if you want, to new media, where the information is produced in a disintermediated way by both classic traditional information producers and by users. So looking at this from a data science point of view, the number of data is still growing exponentially. So the amount of data is getting larger and larger. At the same time, we are getting information also from social media, and especially from social media, which are characterized by a lot of randomness. So here we can see as in the top panel of this slide a screenshot from a paper we published a few years ago about the number of interaction on multiple social media, and we can see that these are distribution that allow for very viral event. So there is this virality that is actually something that is actually quite studied, but also happening. The thing is that this virality, in this case intended as the growth rate of news interactions, is essentially randomly distributed. So it follows a process which is globally random. So the idea is that we are in an environment which is characterized by an overabundance of content and by a lot of randomness and unpredictability. And things are getting even worse, also considering now the possibility to use AI to produce new content, so generative AI. So the idea is that we as human has to resort to some heuristic in order to consume information. So we use these heuristics that are human biases, especially confirmation bias, or how it's the way it is called in the communication study, you know this better than me, is selective exposure. Together with this aspect of human biases in information consumption, another filtering mechanism that is put in place by social media platforms especially, but also information providers, are algorithmic recommendations. So algorithms suggesting the content that is better for us, according to our previous stories on the web. So for what concerns information consumption, the main bias that we have is called selective exposure. So the tendency that we have to seek out for consonant information and avoid dissonant information, with the aim of reducing cognitive dissonance, which is the sense of discomfort that we have when we have different opinions at the same time. So we were tracking together, with a large body of literature, but we were having a data science approach on measuring selective exposure using a big data set from Facebook and studying how people interacted with news outlet. What we found essentially is that the users were very heterogeneous and tended to concentrate on very few pages, so to gather information from very few sources while spanning a lot of topics. So they were essentially selecting very few sources of information. At the same time, there is actually the role of algorithmic recommendation, for which we cannot provide actually in many instances evidence, but we know that they are put in place by thanks to declaration by platforms and to the experience of users, but also, for instance, journalists doing online research. What's the problem is that the combination of our biases, let's say selective exposure, and these recommendation algorithms, especially with respect to topics that are likely to polarize opinion, can create echo chambers, which are communities of users in which pre-existing opinions get reinforced by interacting with other users. And the presence of echo chambers can be problematic for a number of reasons, like coordination to take action, for instance, vaccinating, or for democratic deliberation, and so on. In a study considering multiple social media platforms at the same time, so Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Gab, which is a social media platform used by the alt-right American, some alt-right American movement, we were essentially able, I cannot go into the details, to track the presence of echo chamber regarding specific topics on specific platforms. For instance, in this plot, when you see two separated blobs, you can say that there are two different opinions and that people are holding those two opinions are not interacting with each other. So for instance, we were finding evidence of echo chambers in the case of the vaccines debate on Facebook and in the case of the debate about abortion, for instance, on Twitter. We were not finding evidence for echo chambers, for instance, on Reddit, and also surprisingly in the case of Gab. So we were finding some evidence about this. So to conclude this short thing is that this short, let's say, talk of postcards from social media, I wanted to provide some evidence about how people tend to react to this overabundance of information and what are potential mechanisms and causes of this environment. But the title of this talk is postcard from social media, because actually this is not a full picture. I was in my talk, in our research, we selected data, we selected the specific topic, especially polarizing one, and we were able to collect data for a certain period of time. So things may also change. We have to remember that social media are essentially a moving target, and that things change over time, but still, as long as we have a little access to data, we can do multi-platform analysis and try to compare one platform to another in order to understand what is real evidence coming from human behavior and what are, platform-specific patterns. So this is it, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Matteo. Fascinating stuff. Now, during the presentations, people have posted a number of questions and points in the chat. There are three I've got in front of me, which in a pleasing symmetry are directed primarily to each one of our three presenters. And I can read them out, but if you'd rather put your question yourself, please don't hesitate to jump in. So I'm going to propose to go back to Shahira first. And there's a question from Shabir. If you're there, Shabir, would you like to put your question, or I can read it out if you wish? Just let me know.
Hi, Professor. Thank you.
Hi, Shabir.
Hi. So my question to Professor Shahira is that the powerful people, the conflict, the leaders, and the oppressor leaders, they would always want to that such images which show the problems of the kids of the common people. These are hide from the larger audiences. So I think by showing such pictures, we're actually highlighting the brutalities of the war. So why would we then put these images as war oriented? Thank you.
Okay, so to get your just an understanding, Shabir, you say that the enemy would appreciate such images?
No, they would say that they should not be shared because it would actually then show the brutality. For example, in Israel, for example, if the Israel, they would say that we should not be showing such images because the brutalities of the war would be then exposed to the common people.
Indeed,
Okay,
as,
so
as a side note, we'll have seen that that the story yesterday that Israel has now announced that it's going to take Al Jazeera television off air at whatever point it sees fit. But anyway, Shahira, you carry on.
It's very interesting and it's very important, like you mentioned. I think you mentioned also in the in the chat that context is very important, and it is very true that what's happening on the ground, sometimes it's very difficult to promote peace when everything around you is bomb after bomb. And I think I want to quote you, Jay, because I did hear your lecture online when you mentioned that justice is key if you want to achieve if the goal is really to do balanced reporting and to promote peace journalism, that the context of justice is very important. I totally agree. But I also want to mention a couple of things. One is, it's sometimes when we talk about peace journalism, I think we also might look at more of a longitudinal form of reporting as opposed to the here and now. So I think sometimes it is difficult to kind of say, okay, we're going to do peace reporting right now, and several bombs happen at this exact moment. It might be difficult. So I think one important aspect of peace journalism is not to just report right now on a conflict and then just go, but kind of keep reporting. And really the next thing is really to try to focus on pictures of that show resilience, that show courage, because even in the midst of these horrifying scenes that are unfolding in front of our own eyes on social media specifically, and like Ahmed mentioned on Telegram and such, there are still there are still, in my opinion, a universal yearning for peace. I think there is something that we all want. I don't think any of us want to see more carnage and more suffrage. So I think there's always room to show a little bit of hope in the midst of all the chaos. There's always going to be something that we can show that give us hope and aspiration. But I do share, Shabir, your thoughts in a sense that the context on the ground does matter, and perhaps when when there is less bombing, when there is less carnage, when there is less killing happening on the ground, peace journalism gets to be a more realistic goal for all.
Thank you, Shahira, and thanks, Shabir.
I mean, I have questions from the ground that I.
With your leave, I was going to move on to Marianne. I see you've switched on your camera. Would you like to? You have a specific question in response to Ahmed's presentation. Would you like to ask it yourself?
Yes, and before I get to that, I just have a general question for all the presenters, which is, what's the best way to contact you to follow up with specific questions and additional research? And so for Ahmed, I guess I'm wondering what the relationship between virality and the actual content is, as opposed to maybe just the headline or the visual preview that comes up on different social media networks. And also maybe, and because I've seen this in different groups and on platforms that I'm in, that sometimes the virality comes because I've seen that 500 people have already commented on this, so I need to reshare this because clearly it's something that's important enough that 500 people have already commented on it, even if I haven't even read it or necessarily agree with the headline or the content.
Mariana, thank you so much for your questions. Really very important ones. And by the way, been reflecting on these questions for a long time, so it's not easy to answer them. So, talking about headlines, there is a lot of research done about headlines and how meaningful they can be. Just be patient with me. How meaningful they can be in providing insight about the news stories. I actually was one of the people involved in doing a study, large-scale study using only headlines. So they can be practical. However, they are not always representative of what the whole news story is about. As you know, headlines are used by journalists to attract attention. So some of these headlines, many headlines, have some kind of sensational elements to them. So if you look deeper into the article, if you want to have, or in other words, if you want to have an informed idea of the news story, you've got to read all of it. You cannot just stick to the headline. The problem we have today, and I think you rightly highlighted it, is that people, and also what Matt mentioned, people are bombarded with information. So they have little time to read the actual news story. Instead, what they do is just like they look at the headline and probably the image and make a decision on how to react to it. So that's a huge problem that we have today on social media because of the, as we said, the abundance of information. So on the one hand, it could be used if you are doing some kind of large-scale studies, it could give you some insight. But of course, it could be very misleading, especially when you look qualitatively into the details of news stories. So based on research, a lot of people actually do that. They only look at the headline, or if there is an accompanying images, and then they make a decision on how to react to it. So they don't read the actual news story because they don't have the time. That's one of the problems we have today with social media. Moving on to your second question, I hope I answered your first question. The second question was about have you noticed if images or videos play a role? Actually, I will share with you. I'll just give me a few minutes. I was curious about this point before the presentation. So I went to Al Jazeera Arabic Facebook page using CrowdTangle. I think some of you here know CrowdTangle. It's an initiative offered by Facebook to give us some kind of access to Facebook. And I was curious to see what are people engaging with on Al Jazeera. It seems that images have the most important role to be played here, followed by videos. So images are very important in drawing attention, followed by videos, and in the end text. So people actually find it very hard these days to read because it requires thinking, right, and effort. So instead they prefer to look at the visuals. That's why Shahira's work is always useful and going viral, because she works on visuals. No, I'm just joking. But it's true. The visuals play a very important role in today's world, as always, followed by videos, because videos take far more time. And of course, the least important thing for them will be reading the text, because it requires a lot of imagination and thinking. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Ahmed. Salma, or is it Salma Jane from the Philippines, responding to Mateo's presentation. Would you like to expand on that point that you've put in the chat? You're welcome to, if you would like to.
Hello, good evening from the Philippines. I'm a content creator for my office. We have a Facebook page, and I realized that the good stories that we post don't really get much attention as opposed to stories that are kind of scandalous or have negative impact. So I I I'm I would like to ask Mom Shahira, how do we make the good stories more viral so as to inspire other people?
I think just from just my experience and just from reading the literature, I think emotions are very important. They definitely draw interest, draw attention. So I think again, once you have an image that, in the same way, and in a sense that is also not too, for example, not too graphic, that's going to, make people look the other way. So you want something that generates that generates emotions and human interest. Then I think people will be more likely to consume the information. As opposed to, let's say, a dry image of, showing like a building, right? Like if you want to say, like, there's an ongoing conflict, and you post a picture of a demolished building, as opposed to one that has, for example, someone that's portrayed, someone that is showing emotions of some sort. This is going to get definitely a lot more attention and a lot more recall from the audience. So I think the key is really, in my opinion, I think it's trying to produce content that is emotionally driven.
Thank you, Shahira, and thank you, Salma, for your question. Could I jump in then and perhaps direct some of that your way, Matteo? Given the categories that Shahira has proposed for the visuals and their significance within an overall context of conflict, to cross-reference that with your work on what drives virality, is it possible, do you think, to identify a certain kind of image that would have a chance of doing what Salma has suggested, which is to get more attention for more peace-enhancing imagery?
Well, it's a hard question. I mean, for sure. I mean, the problem of virality has been long studied by you and by other scholars. I think one thing that we should keep in mind is that why people are on social media. Essentially, we are using a tool for, I mean, which is not taught for consuming information for such purpose. So it's an entertainment, and it's an entertainment environment. So for sure, things has to be entertaining, and I mean, even according to last reports, only a portion of people are on social media for checking out and for reading the news. There are for sure certain elements that affect virality, and this can be for sure using emotional content, but not only. I mean, also the kind of content you post. So a native video on Facebook, for instance, may have some impact on the final outcome. And this also depends upon internal mechanisms that are implemented by platforms. Overall, I mean, we are also trying to study what are the key elements that may predict or may actually more than predict. Yeah, I would say predict if a content will be viral. But essentially, the environment is so noisy, so prone to large fluctuation that there is no, let's say, magic formula that I could point you to, unfortunately. But this is the case. What we see, this is the case in a work in progress. What we see is that there is some sort of effect where social media and news pages are actually news pages on social media get more and more engagement for a long period of time until they do a viral post, and then there is a decay. So it seems there is some sort of preparation or accumulation process, like preferential attachment process that goes towards virality.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from anyone in the audience for any one or more of our speakers?
I have a question I wanted to ask. Shahira, mostly I think for you, but others, I'd love to hear their point of view as well. When you do have a devastating conflict like the one that's going on in Gaza or Ukraine or elsewhere, if you do peace journalism, where you're talking about people from the different sides coming together, trying to find long-term, reconciliation and so on, does that undermine, maybe validate one side that might be the aggressor or might be perceived as doing unjust actions? How do you balance that?
I think this is a very important question. Thank you for posting it, and I think it's kind of similar in a way to what Shabir had originally asked earlier. In terms of if we don't publish pictures that show the devastation that's ongoing, then you're really helping the aggressor in a way. Again, I don't think there is really an easy answer to that question. But again, I think we should look at peace journalism, in my opinion, at least, we should look at peace journalism more as a longitudinal goal, as not something that, like back in the day, they used to, call parachute journalism, where people used to come when there's a conflict, they come, they cover the ongoing situation, and then they leave. I think the key to really achieve the long-term peace journalism goal is really to continue the reporting, even after the actual conflict has stopped, and to then cover stories that deal with reconciliation, that deal with rebuilding and reconstruction. I think we should look at it more holistically as a not just as the here and now when the conflict is ongoing, but also as a long-term goal. Again, this is just my personal opinion, and I'd like to hear from the floor as well what everybody else thinks.
If I can jump in, I think I'm in sympathy with your point about the longitudinal effect, because of course the meanings and the meanings people will make out of images depend on being in a sequence, what comes before and what comes after them. And I'm thinking one of the most impactful single images that I can remember from Australia, for example, was it was influential on the debate over responses to people seeking asylum. And it was the image of the young boy, Alan Kurdi, who was drowned on a beach in Turkey, and he appeared at the edge of the surf face down. It was a very kind of a moving and affecting image. But of course, it was only effective because it was then inserted into a sequence of meaning making in response to other images and also other material, textual material, and it depended on people exerting agency from elsewhere in the story to make it have its effect. But its effect in Australia, where I was at the time, was certainly to kind of shift the discourse towards the experiences and testimonies of the people seeking asylum themselves, and effectively to humanize the story. And that seemed to rely on kind of rousing people to an emotion of righteous anger. So there are different kinds of anger, aren't there? You can have anger towards the other side and want to do something to them, or you can have righteous anger at the outrage that this young boy's potential has been cruelly kind of snatched away by an iniquitous system, and that can be a positive thing. So it's a further differentiation, isn't it, between the types of emotional response that an image will generate.
And can I add something to what you just mentioned, Jake, which I think is really brilliant, that picture of the dead boy on the beach. One thing I think that make this picture really work, in my opinion, is that, again, going back to the idea of universal peace that we all want as humans. I think one reason is this picture. If you look at this picture again, you will see it's not a picture of a specific boy that you can identify. I think what made this picture work is that it could be any boy. There was unfortunately there was no face shown. It was just, I mean, in a sense, it made people identify that this could be their kid. It could be the kid next door. And again, this made it extremely powerful, the emotions that it highlighted. But again, I want to say is that we all want peace at the end of the day. So I think that's kind of very important. And I think this is why the image was extremely powerful, because it did talk to each and every one of us.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a couple of contributions there from Andrea Maraskin. Sorry, I've not met you before, but you're talking about Philippines news sources have started beats covering peace. So I know about Minda News and my very good friend Carola Guias, and she's been continuing to offer very detailed and impressive reporting of the peace process, the process of building peace now with the Moro people. But Andrea, would you like to come in and offer us any commentary about any other news sources and their beats to cover peace?
Hi. Well, what I was thinking of in Colombia is El Espectador, which is a major newspaper. They have a beat called Colombia 20 plus, which was originally Colombia 2020. So it's been, I think it was started before the 2016 peace agreement, and it's continued. We interviewed a former journalist from there named Daniel Salgar, who was terrific, and he went on to work on the Truth Commission report, which came out, I think it was 2021, and now he works for the UNHCR. But he said it wasn't the only one. I don't read Spanish, so I haven't really been able to take a comprehensive look. But, it's like peace has become a political topic in Colombia. And so it's worthy of coverage as you would cover politics, both positive steps in the way of peace and steps back. But what Daniel Salgar told us that was really powerful was that the journalists in the generation before him grew up, they covered war. They basically, that was what was going on. So there was a civil war for 50 years, they covered war. And then his generation kind of came of age covering peace. That's
a very nice note on which to wrap up, I think. Thank you very much for that. A glimmer of hope. And we have 2 minutes left. Ahmad, did you want to come in? Yeah, I could see you putting your hand.
Just a fast comment, really fast,
Yeah.
super fast. So just going back to Alan Kurdi's point, image and peace journalism, I think one element of virality, which we did not talk about, was relevance. Because audiences have to see the relevance of a story to their own lives. If they don't see it, they will be less likely to interact and probably seek peace. So talking about Alan Kurdi's image, there was relevance here. Alan Kurdi, by the way, was whitewashed. His name is not Alan. Alan is a white name. It's a very Western name. His name is originally Aylan, which is Kurdish, but it got whitewashed. And the boy also is white. And and well dressed. That was one of the main, also another important reason why people identified and related to that boy. So relevance is really important to be taken into account when it comes to virality. Apologize, but I made it very fast. Thank you.
Very interesting point. Thank you very much indeed. Look, I think with 1 minute to the top of the hour, I know you'll want to join me in giving heartfelt thanks to our three presenters today who've given us fantastic insights into their research and relevance to the future prospects of peace journalism. So thank you very much to Shahira, Ahmed and Matteo. And also thank you to Babak for creating this series. I'm going to put a little clap emoji, therefore, to him in the chat. It's been a very eye-opening series and very good connecting tissue for the global peace journalism community. So thank you very much. And perhaps I could give it to you for any last word to wrap us up.
Just want to take this opportunity to thank all the presenters today, Shahir, Ahmed, Mateo, and Jake for excellent job moderating, keeping everything on time and schedule. And this wraps up our webinar series. We've had 6 webinars. You can find all the videos at the Medium Peacebuilding Project. I put the link in the chat earlier. So please feel free to refer to these. I know at least one classroom is looking at these separately outside of this live kind of webinar. So please feel free to use this as a resource. And I hope this can we can continue this community, this kind of community ongoing in other ways, so please keep the conversation going. And for those who are wrapping up their academic semesters, good luck wrapping that up and everything. And yeah, great meeting you all over the past 6 weeks. Thank you very much.